Some people think owning a lake is just about having a pretty view and maybe catching some fish on weekends. Those people clearly have never met a Karen who thinks your private property is her personal playground. Let me tell you about the day I discovered that my remote lake house wasn't quite remote enough to keep the entitled masses at bay. I inherited this little slice of paradise from my grandfather 3 years ago. 27 acres of pristine water surrounded by dense forest, about 2 hours from the nearest city. The old man was smart enough to buy the entire lake back in the 70s when land was cheap and people minded their own business. Now I spend my weekends here, enjoying the silence that city life never provides. The property comes with a decent-sized dock, a small boathouse, and my pride and joy, a 24-foot pontoon boat that I've customized with some interesting features. Thanks to my tech-savvy friend Derek, who you might remember from that Tesla Karen incident on my channel, this boat has some upgrades that would make James Bond jealous. But more on that later. This particular Saturday started like any other. I'd driven up Friday night, planning to spend the weekend doing absolutely nothing productive. The weather was perfect, that kind of early summer day where the air smells like pine needles and possibility. I was sitting on my deck with morning coffee, watching a family of ducks paddle by, when I heard something that made my blood pressure spike faster than a Karen spotting an unattended manager. Voices. Loud, obnoxious, city voices carrying across the water like nails on a chalkboard. At first, I thought maybe it was just some hikers on the trail that runs along the eastern shore. But as the noise got closer, I realized these weren't hikers. These were invaders. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the shoreline. There, stumbling through the trees like drunk elephants, was a group of about 6 people. They were dragging coolers, beach chairs, and what looked like enough alcohol to stock a small bar. Leading this merry band of trespassers was a woman who could only be described as a Karen in her natural habitat. Blonde bob haircut that probably cost more than my monthly utilities, designer sunglasses perched on top of her head despite the shade, and that special kind of confident stride that screams, "I belong everywhere I decide to be." I watched through my binoculars as Karen and her crew set up what appeared to be a full-scale beach party on my shoreline. They were maybe 200 yards from my dock, close enough that I could hear every word of their increasingly loud conversation. Apparently, they were celebrating Karen's promotion at some marketing firm. Because of course she worked in marketing. "This place is absolutely perfect," Karen announced to her group, gesturing around like she was presenting the lake to potential buyers. "I can't believe we found such a private spot." Private. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Her friends were equally charming. There was Brad, whose tank top proclaimed him to be a lake life legend, despite clearly being a city boy who probably thought fish came pre-filleted. Then we had Tiffany, who was already complaining about getting sand in her designer flip-flops, and 3 other generic suburbanites whose names I never caught, but whose personalities could be summed up as agreeable followers of Karen. They'd been there maybe 20 minutes when I decided to take action. I walked down to the water's edge and called out across the lake, "Hey, this is private property. You need to leave." Karen turned toward my voice, shading her eyes dramatically. "Excuse me? I don't see any signs." "The entire lake is private property," I called back. "There are no trespassing signs at every access point." This was true. I'd installed them after the second time some Yahoo tried to launch a jet ski from my shore. Karen cupped her hands around her mouth. "Well, we didn't see them. We're not hurting anything. We'll be gone by evening." By evening. As if my schedule should accommodate their illegal camping trip. I could have walked around the shore to confront them directly, but something told me this group wasn't going to be reasonable. Karen had that particular look in her eye that said she'd already decided she was right, and I was just some cranky hermit trying to ruin her good time. So I went back to my deck and kept watching. Maybe they'd get bored and leave on their own. Maybe pigs would fly and pay my property taxes. Instead, they got louder and drunker. By noon, Brad was attempting to skip stones and hitting nothing but water with the grace of a drunken rhinoceros. Tiffany was sunbathing topless, which wouldn't have bothered me except she kept shrieking every time a bug landed on her. And Karen? Karen was holding court, regaling her audience with what sounded like every workplace victory she'd ever achieved. real or imagined. The party was entering hour 3 of what felt like a siege when I noticed something that made me put down my sandwich and grab the binoculars again. My boat was gone. My beautiful, customized, definitely not cheap pontoon boat was no longer tied to my dock. At first, I thought maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the angle was wrong, or maybe I'd forgotten where I'd moored it. But no, the dock was empty except for some rope floating in the water where my boat should have been. I scanned the lake frantically until I spotted it. There, about half a mile out, my boat was cruising along at a leisurely pace with Karen's entire crew aboard. They were using my boat like their personal yacht, complete with music blasting from the sound system I'd installed last summer. The audacity was breathtaking. They'd gone from trespassing to theft in less than 4 hours. It was like watching evolution in fast forward, except instead of developing useful traits, they were developing increasingly creative ways to violate property laws. I grabbed my phone and called the sheriff's department. Deputy Martinez answered on the third ring. Sheriff's department, this is Martinez. Deputy, this is Jake Henderson out at Mirror Lake. I've got trespassers on my property who just stole my boat. There was a pause. Your boat? The whole lake is yours, right? That's correct. They're about half a mile out right now, joyriding in my pontoon boat. Okay, we're about 30 minutes out. Are they armed or dangerous? I looked through my binoculars at Karen, who was now standing at the front of my boat like she was the queen of the world, drink raised in a toast to her own brilliance. Only to my sanity and property values. But deputy, you might want to call the Coast Guard too. They're in the middle of the lake, and I have a feeling this is going to end with people in the water. Coast Guard? For a lake? Trust me on this one. After I hung up, I watched Karen's group through my binoculars. They were having the time of their lives on my boat, completely oblivious to the fact that they'd just upgraded from trespassing to grand theft. Brad was attempting to fish with my equipment, Tiffany was taking selfies at the helm, and Karen was directing the whole operation like some kind of nautical Napoleon. The interesting thing about entitled people is that they always assume their luck will hold. They never consider that the person they're screwing over might have resources, connections, or in my case, a very special relationship with marine technology. I pulled out my phone and opened an app that most boat owners don't have. Derek had installed it along with the other modifications, and I'd never actually used it in anger before. But watching my stolen property cruise around my private lake while thieves celebrated their crimes? Well, there's a first time for everything. 35 minutes later, I heard the rumble of engines coming up the access road. 2 sheriff's department vehicles pulled into my driveway, followed by a Coast Guard truck towing a rescue boat. I walked down to meet them, trying to look appropriately distressed about my stolen property while hiding the fact that I was actually excited to test out Derek's modifications. Deputy Martinez stepped out first, a guy in his 40s who dealt with me a few times over the years when hunters had gotten too close to my property line. Behind him came Deputy Foster, younger and looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else, and 2 Coast Guard officers who introduced themselves as Petty Officer Williams and Seaman Johnson. So where are they now? Martinez asked, accepting the binoculars I offered. I pointed toward the middle of the lake where my boat was still cruising in lazy circles. They've been out there for about an hour now. Looks like they're having quite the party. Williams studied the situation through his own binoculars. We can take the rescue boat out and apprehend them, but it's going to be tricky if they decide to run. That pontoon boat of yours looks pretty fast. It is, I admitted. But I have a better idea. Can you position yourselves about 100 yards from them? I'll handle getting them to stop. The officers exchanged glances. Foster spoke up first. Sir, we can't let you confront them directly. They've already shown they're willing to commit theft. I'm not going to confront them, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm going to remote control them. The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before someone asks if you've been drinking. Come again, Martinez said slowly. My friend Derek installed some upgrades on the boat. Let's just say it has features that most pontoon boats don't have. I can control it from here. Williams stared at me like I just claimed I could fly. You can remote control your boat? Among other things, yes. Look, just get out there and be ready to pick people out of the water. Trust me, they're going to need rescue in about 10 minutes. The Coast Guard officers launched their rescue boat, while Martinez and Foster stayed on shore with me. I watched through binoculars as they positioned themselves at a safe distance from my stolen boat. Karen's crew was still oblivious, too busy drinking my beer and using my boat to notice they had an audience. "Okay," I said, opening the app on my phone. "Everyone might want to step back and watch this." The app interface was beautifully simple. Derek had designed it like a video game controller, with options for speed, direction, and what he cheerfully called special functions. I started with something subtle, just a slight reduction in throttle. On the lake, my boat began to slow down. I could see Karen's group looking around in confusion, probably wondering why their joyride was suddenly less joyful. "Did you just," Martinez started, "slow them down?" "Yep, but that's just the beginning." I tapped another control, and the boat began to turn in a slow, wide circle. Through the binoculars, I could see Brad frantically working the steering wheel, which was now completely useless since I'd switched the boat to remote control mode. The look of confusion on Karen's face as my boat began its slow, deliberate circle was absolutely priceless. She was gesturing wildly at Brad, who was spinning the steering wheel like he was playing some demented arcade game. Tiffany had stopped taking selfies and was gripping the railing with the kind of white-knuckled terror usually reserved for airplane turbulence. "This is impossible," Foster muttered, watching through his own binoculars. "You're actually controlling that boat from here?" "Derek's a genius," I replied, making minor adjustments to keep the circle tight and controlled. "He specializes in creative modifications. You should see what he did to someone's Tesla once." Martinez was shaking his head in disbelief. "How is this legal? It's my boat, on my lake, stolen by people who are trespassing on my property." I'd say the legal questions are entirely on their end. Through the binoculars, I could see Karen had moved to the front of the boat and was waving her arms at the Coast Guard rescue boat, clearly trying to signal for help. The irony was beautiful. She was asking for rescue from the consequences of her own theft. I gradually tightened the circle and increased the speed slightly. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to make the ride very uncomfortable for my uninvited passengers. The physics of circular motion are wonderfully predictable. Even at relatively slow speeds, continuous turning creates a centrifugal effect that plays havoc with the inner ear. "Oh man," Martinez said, watching Karen's group start to look distinctly green around the gills. "They're starting to look seasick." "Motion sickness," I corrected. "It's amazing how quickly it hits when you're going in circles. I'd estimate they have about 2 more minutes before the nausea really kicks in." William's voice crackled over Martinez's radio. "We're in position. Whatever you're doing, it's working. They look like they want off that boat pretty badly." I could see Karen leaning over the side of the boat, and it wasn't to admire the view. Brad was sitting down hard on one of the bench seats, head in his hands. Tiffany was making what appeared to be frantic phone calls, probably trying to get cell service to call for help that was already on the way. "Time for the finale," I announced, tapping the stop function on my phone. The boat came to an abrupt halt in the middle of its circle, the sudden change in motion providing the final push that physics demanded. Through the binoculars, I watched as Karen's entire crew rushed to the sides of the boat, leaning over the railings. And then, in a moment of perfect karmic justice, they started falling overboard. It wasn't dramatic or dangerous, just the inevitable result of dizzy, nauseous people leaning too far over the edge of a boat while trying not to throw up. One by one, they toppled into the lake with all the grace of drunk penguins. Foster started laughing despite himself. "Did they just fall off their own stolen boat?" Yes, they did." The rescue operation was surprisingly efficient. Williams and Johnson had been prepared for exactly this scenario, and within 5 minutes they had Karen and her entire crew out of the water and wrapped in emergency blankets. The Coast Guard officers were professional enough not to laugh, but I could see them fighting smiles as they helped the bedraggled thieves into their rescue boat. I tapped my phone one more time, and my pontoon boat obediently turned toward shore, cruising back to my dock at a steady, peaceful pace like nothing had happened. "Wait," Martinez said, watching my boat return home under its own power. "You could have just brought the boat back from the beginning?" I shrugged, not even trying to hide my grin. Sure, but where's the fun in that? Plus, some people needed to learn a lesson. And for the record, we just dropped some ballast. Martinez started chuckling. Ballast. Dead weight that was slowing down my boat's performance. Even Foster cracked a smile at that one. The Coast Guard brought Karen's group to shore, and the sight was everything I could have hoped for. They stood on my dock like a collection of drowned rats, shivering under thermal blankets and looking absolutely miserable. Karen's perfectly styled hair was plastered to her head. Her designer sunglasses were somewhere at the bottom of my lake, and her makeup had run in ways that suggested she'd bought waterproof mascara from a very unreliable source. But the best part was yet to come. Martinez approached the group with his citation book ready. All right, folks, let's start with identification. You're being charged with trespassing and theft. Karen drew herself up to her full height, which was considerably less impressive when she was dripping wet and wrapped in a Coast Guard blanket. Now wait just a minute, officer. This is clearly a misunderstanding. How so, ma'am? And then Karen delivered the line that will live in my memory forever. The statement, so perfectly entitled that it could have been crafted by a team of comedy writers. It wasn't written on the boat that it belonged to someone, so we took it. The silence that followed was deafening. Martinez stopped writing mid-sentence. Foster's mouth actually fell open. Even the Coast Guard officers, who had probably heard every excuse in the book, looked stunned. Ma'am, Martinez said carefully, are you seriously telling me that you thought an expensive boat, tied to a private dock on private property, was just free for the taking? Karen's chin jutted out defiantly. There was no sign on the boat itself. The entire shoreline is posted with no trespassing signs. I called out from where I was standing. And there's a sign at the dock that says, private property, no mooring. We didn't see them. Tiffany piped up, her voice shaky from cold and embarrassment. Not seeing signs doesn't make trespassing legal, Foster informed her, finally finding his voice. The arrest process was almost anticlimactic after Karen's golden moment of legal logic. Martinez and Foster loaded the 6 trespassers into 2 patrol cars with the efficiency of officers who had dealt with entitled tourists before. Karen spent the entire time loudly proclaiming her innocence to anyone who would listen, which at that point was basically just the lake itself. This is harassment, she shouted as Martinez helped her into the back seat. I'm going to sue everyone involved. The police department, the Coast Guard, and especially him. She pointed an accusatory finger at me. Good luck with that, Martinez replied dryly. You might want to focus on finding a good criminal defense attorney instead. Brad, who had been quiet since his impromptu swimming lesson, finally spoke up. Karen, maybe we should have asked permission first. The look Karen gave him could have frozen the lake solid. Don't you dare take his side, Bradley. As the patrol cars pulled away, Williams and Johnson began packing up their rescue equipment. Williams walked over to me with an expression of professional curiosity mixed with amusement. That remote control system, he said. Is that something you built yourself? A friend helped with the technical aspects, I replied. Let's just say he has a talent for creative problem solving. Well, it certainly solved today's problem. Though I have to ask, was making them seasick really necessary? I considered the question seriously. Probably not necessary, no? But they stole my boat, trespassed on my property, and showed zero remorse until they were literally in over their heads. Sometimes people need to experience consequences to understand why rules exist. Johnson nodded thoughtfully. Plus, it was pretty impressive from a technical standpoint. I've never seen anything like it. Neither had I until today, I admitted. Derek installed it as a security feature, but I never imagined I'd use it quite like this. The Coast Guard finished loading their equipment and prepared to leave. As they were pulling out, Martinez walked back over from where he'd been making notes in his patrol car. Interesting day, he said, tucking his citation book back into his belt. Yeah, I replied, watching the sun begin to set over my peaceful lake. And it's not even the end of the week yet. Martinez laughed and shook his head. I've got to ask, though, how did your friend Derek know you'd need a remote control system for your boat? Derek believes in being prepared for any situation. He calls it defensive technology. After that incident with the Tesla Karen, He's been upgrading everything I own. Tesla Karen? Foster asked, looking intrigued despite himself. That's a story for another day, I said. But let's just say Derek has strong feelings about entitled people and advanced automotive systems. The officers finished their paperwork and prepared to leave. As Martinez climbed into his patrol car, he rolled down the window one last time. You know, we probably should have asked earlier, but that remote control thing, it's legal, right? I grinned. It's my boat, officer. I can drive it however I want, from wherever I want. Karen and her friends were just unauthorized passengers who decided to take an unscheduled swim. I thought that would be the end of the story. Karen and her crew got their citations, I got my boat back, and my lake returned to its usual peaceful state. Sometimes justice is served quickly and efficiently, with just the right amount of poetic irony thrown in for good measure. But the universe apparently wasn't done with its comedy show. As I was cleaning up my dock the next morning, I noticed I had several missed calls and a bunch of notifications on my social media accounts. That was unusual, since I barely use social media and certainly never posted anything interesting enough to generate notifications. I opened the first notification and found myself staring at a video titled, "Entitled Woman Steals Boat. Owner Controls It by Remote and Dumps Them in Lake." The video had been posted by someone called LakeLife_teen and had already racked up over 50,000 views. As I watched, my jaw slowly dropped. Some kid had filmed the entire incident from the shoreline, capturing everything from Karen's group setting up their illegal beach party to their undignified splash landing in my lake. The video was actually pretty well edited. It showed Karen's initial defiance, the confusion as the boat started acting strangely, the dawning realization that something was very wrong, and finally the spectacular finale as they all went overboard. The kid had even added some dramatic music during the circular boat ride. But the best part was the commentary. A teenage voice provided running narration. "Oh snap, look at this lady. She just took someone's boat like it's a rental. Bro, that's not how lakes work. Wait, is the boat turning by itself? Yo, this is some James Bond stuff right here. Oh no, they're looking green. This is about to get real. And there they go. Man, karma works fast around here." The comment section was pure gold. Hundreds of people were sharing their own entitled person stories, praising the mysterious boat owner for his creative justice and asking technical questions about how remote boat control worked. Someone had even made a gif of Karen falling off the boat with the caption, "When entitlement meets technology." Within 3 days, the video had gone viral. It was shared across Reddit, TikTok, Facebook, and every other platform where people gather to watch entitled individuals get their comeuppance. The local news picked it up, then regional news, and finally it made it onto one of those amazing viral videos television shows. And that's when things got really interesting. My phone started ringing constantly. People wanted boat tours. They wanted to hire me for parties. Someone offered to buy the rights to my story for a movie. A tech company called asking about licensing Derek's remote control system. 3 different documentary crews wanted to interview me about innovative approaches to property protection. But the most surprising call came from a travel blogger who'd been following the story. "Mr. Henderson, I represent a group of investors who are interested in developing eco-friendly tourism experiences. Would you be interested in offering guided boat tours of your lake? We think there's a real market for adventure tourism with a technology twist." I looked out at my peaceful lake, then at my boat resting quietly at the dock, then at my phone which was already ringing again. "You know what?" I said. "Let me talk to Derek and get back to you." 6 months later, I'm booked solid through next summer. Turns out people really enjoy hearing the Karen boat story while cruising around the scene of the crime. Derek has installed remote control systems on 3 additional boats, and we're working on some other defensive technology features that should make future tours even more interesting. The best part? Every tour group gets to hear about the importance of respecting private property, reading signs, and not taking things that don't belong to you. It's like a floating morality play, except with better technology and significantly higher entertainment value. Karen never did follow through on her lawsuit threats, by the way. Hard to sue someone for recovering their own stolen property, especially when there's video evidence of the theft. I heard through the grapevine that she and her friends are now known locally as the Lake Crew and have become something of a cautionary tale in their social circle. As for me, well, I still spend my weekends at the lake, but now I'm usually too busy giving tours to enjoy the quiet solitude I originally came here for. It's a fair trade, though. Nothing beats the look on people's faces when I fire up that remote control app and show them exactly how Karen's joyride came to such a splashing conclusion. And Derek? He's already working on upgrades for the new boats. Something about sonar systems and automated fishing line deployment. I'm almost afraid to ask, but knowing Derek, it'll probably come in handy the next time someone decides my property is their personal playground. After all, you never know when you might need to drop some more ballast. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.